Hello everybody and welcome back to the second shelf and to another TBR video. And as you know, end of the month, beginning of the new month, for the purpose of this particular video, TBR means to be released. So what I do, for those of you who might be new, I look at upcoming releases in the next month, so this time in December, and then I pick a couple of 4 or 5 books that I personally found interesting and I share them with you. December was not that easy to come up with the TBR because obviously, I never understood the ins and outs of publishing, even though I publish books myself. But I don't know why November has tons of new releases and December has very few. Maybe if you spread them, they would get more attention. But like I said, what do I know? I have no idea. But anyway, December, it was not a month in which I could pick from tons and tons of new releases. But I did find five. I did find five. I think five. I think five, if I can count correctly, that I thought would be interesting enough to share them. And as always, we start the TBR, the to be released video, with general fiction. And for this, I picked a book by L. Bodetsky Williams. L stands for Lisa, but her author name is not Lisa Bodetsky Williams, but L. Bodetsky Williams. So we go with that. Forget Russia, which will be published on the very first day of December, next Tuesday. L. Bodetsky Williams is a scholar. She lives in New York, and she teaches literature. She wrote a memoir about a letter to Virginia Woolf and literary criticism book. And I think, as far as I could tell from the research I did, I'm a bit, not as deep into the research at the moment because I had to get this video out before I lose any sign of natural light. Anyway, so I think this is her first novel. It's kind of an almost historical fiction because it is set in the past, but in the very recent past, in the 1980s. And we follow Anna, who is a student at the University of Connecticut, the daughter, the second generation of immigrants. So she is a second generation Jewish Russian immigrant and is the daughter of, hence, first generation Jewish Russian immigrants. And she goes to study abroad in Moscow. And then we follow her quote unquote adventures in Moscow, but also there is the political background of, the 1980s in Russia, and she goes back into the past to find out something about her family's history during the Brezhnev era in Russia. I'm always interested in literature set in Russia or one of these countries that I personally know very little about. I did read L. Bodetsky's memoir, The Letters to Virginia Woolf, and I quite liked it. I don't know how well she will do with a novel, but the theme and the characteristics of the book were interesting enough, for me at least, to put it on the TBR for December. Next, we move on to a work in translation. And normally I would say translated fiction, but for December I picked a work of translated nonfiction. And I had to refilm this clip because, of course, I said in the beginning, we move on now to translated fiction. Which is not true, because it's a work of nonfiction. It's still Nonfiction November, so my head is still very much in the nonfiction mode. And I found this book by Judith Shalansky, Inventory of Losses, translated from the German by Jackie Smith, and it will be published on the 8th of December. Now, Judith Shalansky, as you could gather from the translation, is a German writer. She studied art history. She was born in 1980. And I read a couple of her books in German, and she writes fiction and nonfiction. The nonfiction often about art or objects. And her fiction is often quite bizarre. It's not to everybody's taste, I would say. But this one, her new nonfiction work, or at least the English translation is new. It came out in Germany in 2018, is about lost objects. So Judith Szalansky writes about 12 objects, and that can be a poem, an island, a species, certain species of tigers, or a painting that have been lost. And the only trail we have of them, or the only knowledge we have of them, is kind of a paper trail. In other words, people writing about it, or some, art book that would talk about this lost painting. But you can't see, watch, go and observe the object anymore yourself. And I thought the idea of, tracing things that have been lost intrigued me a lot. I haven't read this book in the German original, but now that the English translation is out, it's another, it will give me another push, hopefully, to pick up this book even after Nonfiction November, because we should read nonfiction even after Nonfiction November is over. Now, shouldn't we? But it's a theme of losses, and knowing Judith Szalansky's work, I'm sure she has interesting reflections about what it means to only have a sort of a memory of a certain object, or even a whole island that disappeared. It sounded intriguing, so I thought, why not, for a change, put a work of nonfiction in my category translated fiction for the December TBR. Next, we move on to quote-unquote true historical fiction. So set a little further in the past than 1980, the first book in the category general fiction. And for this, I picked Mary Benedict's new book, The Mystery of Mrs. Christie, which will be published towards the end of the month on the 29th of December. Mary Benedict, you might know her from her earlier work of historical fiction, and she often chooses a famous or at least known character. So she wrote a book about Einstein's wife. She wrote a book about called The Only Woman in the Room. It's an easygoing style that she handles, and sometimes that's just what you need. But this one intrigued me not so much because I like this easygoing writing style of Mary Benedict, but because of the subject. As the title suggests, it's about Agatha Christie and the 11 days in 1926 that Agatha Christie disappeared. Her car was found at the close vicinity to a pond. Looking for words, searching for words again. I'm so sorry. Her coat was in the car, and it was cold. I think it was winter, so that was strange. And there was an unprecedented manhunt in order to find her. People thought she might have been victim to a crime. Her husband didn't know anything. And 11 days later, Agatha Christie reappeared, told everybody that she has amnesia and she has no idea where she's been or what happened in those 11 days. So that mystery of the disappearance of Agatha Christie is the premise, the center of the book. I don't know whether Benedict will try to solve the mystery, give a possibility of what might have happened to Agatha Christie, but she will certainly also paint the picture of Agatha Christie's life in the 1920s, shortly before the disappearance in 1926. And yeah, I mean, I'm always a fan of all things Agatha Christie, and the fact that Mary Benedict wanted to tackle this big mystery in the life of a mystery writer, it sounded interesting. So this book made it on the December TBR in the category historical fiction. Next up is another nonfiction book. Like I said, still in the nonfiction November mode, but this time not a translated work, but originally published in English, and that is Mediocre and I have to look down so that I'm not going to butcher the name of this Nigerian-American author, Ijeoma Oluo. Ijeoma Oluo. I hope that was right. And it will be published also on the 1st of December, so next week, Tuesday. I'm only going to use the last name of this author. Oluo was born in 1980. Like I said, she is a Nigerian-American writer, and she writes nonfiction, often about race. So I think one of her most well-known books is So You Want to Talk About Race. And this book, Mediocre, is no different in the sense that it's about white supremacy. Oluo tackles the Trump era, which is almost over, and the idea of how white supremacy affects the lives of the disenfranchised, women, and Black people in particular. One of my reading projects is that ongoing reading project, so it's not a 2020 project, but an ongoing project, is that I want to read work by authors of color, especially women of color, and especially if the work is about racism. So there was no doubt at all when I saw that this book will come out on the 1st of December that Mediocre will make it on the TBR, even though it meant there are 2 nonfiction books in this video, which is a first. But hey, I'm all in for the firsts. And as always, there's nothing new with that. We end the TBR, the to be released video, with sci-fi. And this time I chose Catherine Hernandez's new book, Crosshairs, which will come out on the 8th of December. Hernandez is a Canadian author based in Toronto, and as she calls herself, a proud Black queer writer. Woman/writer. So I'm all in for that, of course, and more importantly, the premise sounded really fascinating and promising. So the book is set in the near future, of course, sci-fi, and the devastation, floods and everything, homelessness. So society is not functioning very well. And the government takes this opportunity to round up minority groups. So people of color, but also the homeless, and also members of the LGBTQ plus community. They round them up, they arrest them, they put them in labor camps. And there is the hero of a book is a queer man, a drag queen who loses his livelihood, and he loses the love of his life, and he starts joining the resistance. I don't want to know more than that. That sounded really, action-packed and unusual characters, at least unusual, for science fiction novels. So I'm all in for that, and I can't wait to read Crosshairs by Catherine Hernandez. So these were my picks for the books to be released in December, and I just made it. I don't think you see it, but the light is really going to fade, so I think in 5 or 10 minutes it's going to be dark. So I just made it during daylight. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. As always, I'm looking forward to your comments, either on the new releases, or share with me a new release that you are particularly looking forward, or any other book-related comment is welcome. And I'll see you all soon in the next one.